What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the No Starving Artists podcast. We've got an incredible guest today that I think is going to be really, really beneficial for a lot of listeners. I know there's a lot of dancers and parents out there that struggle with finding balance in their dancers' lifestyle. So I think today's episode is going to be really, really crucial for that. As always, www.nsadance.com. You can check out everything that we have to offer, past podcasts, dance critiques, etc. But without further ado, today we have Jess Spinner with The Whole Dancer. Just go ahead and tell everybody kind of who you are and what you're doing right now.
Sure. So I am a former professional ballet dancer. And now through The Whole Dancer, I support aspiring and pro dancers, like you mentioned, to find a balanced approach to all things food, body, dance, and life. And it's something I think is becoming more talked about, which I am so happy to see, because I believe that I get to see dancers really shift from being in survival mode and being in those experiences of struggle to getting to a place where they actually feel like they're able to do their best work and enjoy it.
I love that. I love that. I'm really curious. I want to kind of jump right towards that direction. I think I shouldn't say everybody, but I know a lot of teachers, including myself, that as you kind of progress through your teaching, you start to understand more the importance of balance and understand kind of like the power that we as dance teachers actually hold. So I'm curious, was this something you were always tuned into, or was there a significant turning point when you were like, okay, all of these things coming together really serve a purpose and can really kind of, make or break how this ends up for a dancer? Was there something for you personally that led you down this direction?
Yeah, I was not tuned into it at all in
Okay.
my own dance journey.
Okay.
And, I think very much, and like I said, it's starting to shift, and people and teachers are starting to build awareness, and dancers themselves are starting to build awareness. But I'm very much still from a generation of dancers who, like, the messages we received from our teachers and artistic staff was very extreme.
Yep.
And it was like, this is all you should be doing and thinking about, and nothing else matters, and you shouldn't have a life outside of it. And, so that was what I clung to and believed. And when I stopped dancing, I do believe I stopped prematurely, partly because I was injured, but partly because I was just like so beaten down by that point, by myself, by the industry, by my experiences. And I particularly struggled with food and body image. And that was just like so out of whack by that point that like something had to give. So it kind of, for me, just got to a point where I felt like I had no other option than to stop. And then when I stopped, like a lot of things opened up in my mind in terms of like what it can look like when you actually are taking care of yourself. And from there, my initial intention was definitely not to work with dancers, because I was like not ready to get back in there. I didn't think I could handle being in that world. And I also didn't think others struggled as much as I did. We all are very like self-focused and feeling like nobody else is having as hard a time with this as me.
Yeah.
What I was thinking. And then I didn't really think, well, part of me thought things have to have changed, even just in the few years since I'm removed, right?
Right.
Which was not true at all. But, then the other part was, will this be something that even can resonate with dancers?
Was the response what you expected, and was it overwhelming at all? Like, I would imagine once you started, talking and speaking into these spaces, that there was probably a lot of people that kind of clung to it. Was that something that was surprising to you? Was it a little bit overwhelming at first?
It was both of those things.
Yeah.
The first online workshop I ever presented was, it was free. I do a lot of free workshops online, and over 100 people signed up. And, I didn't have much of any kind of network or audience or anything like that at that point. And so I was like kind of shocked.
Yeah.
and even the feedback from it, and like just the seeming novelty of the message at that point, was really quite surprising to me.
Right, right. Yeah, it's really it's a thing for sure, unfortunately. It's a big thing. And I think that there's been a lot of shifts, but I think after COVID too it became even more of a thing.
Hmm.
Um and I think a lot of teachers that are a part of that older mindset still, that more traditional mindset, are really having a hard time right now. Because it used to, for, for better or for worse, it used to work to an extent, right? Like it got the job done, I guess would be a good way to put
Right.
it. Um, but now it seems like it doesn't really do much for these kids at all. If anything, they turn away even faster than they did before,
Hmm.
which is really interesting. So, when you start working with, are you predominantly working with like dancers, teachers, all of the above?
Mostly dancers.
Okay. And when
Yeah.
you start working with them, what is that process like? Are you just kind of trying to get to know them a little bit better? Are there some commonalities that you're seeing amongst a lot of the dancers that you work with?
Yeah. I think that when a dancer gets to the point of actually taking that first step and setting up a consultation with me and then signing on to work together, they often have gotten to a point where they're so sick and tired and exhausted
Mm.
of like overwhelming thoughts and feelings that they are not enough or or worthy, basically.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's the one thing that I get a lot is parents asking about things to look out for. So I kind of wanted to get your opinion because I feel like you'd have a really good perspective because I'm in this similar spaces, but my focus is slightly different.
Yeah.
So are there some things that you see happening to these dancers? So not necessarily what the dancers experience, but things that are happening to them that parents can keep an eye on, that are like, okay, this is, red flags is just kind of the term of
Mm,
right now, but just things that maybe should pique a parent's interest if they're seeing it happen at their studio.
yeah. Part of what's tricky is that I think parents have to build their own self-awareness first. And
Mm.
some of the things that we as a culture and society are willing to accept, like overworking and being perpetually exhausted and not
Yep.
sleeping enough. Well, then when we see a teenage dancer doing that sort of similar thing, I think a lot of times parents are just so used to that that
Mm.
they're like, well, this is just like part of life. And they're pursuing something that's very intense and takes a high level of dedication,
Yeah.
that this is what they have to do.
Yeah.
I would love to change the mentality around that and say, like, if your kid is in school all day and then dancing all night and then staying up doing homework until 1 in the morning and getting
Hmm.
5 or 6 hours of sleep, we are on a very dangerous path,
Hmm.
wherein like the kid's either going to be burnt out. And if they had at one point been like, I'm going to pursue dance professionally, they're not likely to actually keep going on that because they're going to be just so exhausted,
Yeah.
or they're going to go into that and have been living in this place that it's they're just basically done already by the
Hmm.
time they get into their first professional situation,
Yeah.
that it just like will all come crumbling down. So I think that, you know, and this is a dance school thing to consider as well, where, I'm actually doing some teaching now, which I never expected to do in my life. I was one of those dancers who was like, I will never teach dance. Not that I look down on it. I just don't know if I thought it was like really in my skill set.
Yeah.
But I'm teaching some dance now. And one of the schools I teach at is a competition focused school.
Hmm.
And so these kids will be at competition all weekend, and then they have their full regular dance schedule.
Yeah.
Whereas, that's one thing in a professional company that is more accommodating, is like if you perform all weekend, you usually have Monday off,
Right.
or you have part of Monday off at the very least.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think everyone has to kind of say, are we setting these kids up for long-term success, or are we setting them up to be, fully burnt out much too soon?
Yeah.
And the parents, like I said, it's like, can you help? Like, do you have to be the advocate who speaks to the studio owner and says, like, is there anything that we could consider changing here so that it's more manageable?
Right.
You know, because I think that those are the things.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, it's crazy right now. It's a really 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 crazy time for sure. I mean, I just recently started working with some dancers one on one, and like some of these schedules that they're giving me, I'm like, this is absolutely insane. Like I don't understand. It's like, to your point, it's like they're already working. I mean, even some of them even more than what they would do in a professional setting. And they're not even, I mean, they're not even getting paid for it. So it's like, yeah, by the time they get to graduation, it's like, oh, so you're telling me I have to do this for X amount of years more? And I think it's too much. Um, so yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally understand that. I'm curious too. So you talk about kind of, um, food and kind of the body side of things, the mind side of things, and the dance side of things. For you, what does that balance look like? You know, because I know a lot of teachers and even parents have trouble. You know, it's touchy when we start talking about food, or we start talking about, and I'm sure you know firsthand, like when we start talking about these things, if we talk about them incorrectly, it can go very much in the opposite direction that we want it to very, very quickly. So what's the approach? What's the, the best practice for trying to get dancers, whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher, to understand that, like, look, we need to take care of ourselves a little bit better.
Yeah. I think you've got to stay aware of what can be the most dangerous path a dancer can take, which is just under fueling,
Mm,
and the potential for that to take just a dancer's health and well-being completely off track is high, and so that's another thing with scheduling and
yeah, I was
dance.
just thinking this. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, I have kids. I had them last night, and they're like, 11 to 13 or 14, I think. And they have this like 4.5 hour dance block where they have one 15-minute break. And
Yeah.
like, depending on what the school schedule's like, and like when they had lunch and how soon they are coming over to the dance studio, like there's very limited time to actually eat something,
Hmm.
And so it's like, as parents, encouraging kids in any opportunity that they have to consume something. And, like the quality of it can depend on how much time and energy we have to put into that. But like,
Right.
they need calories, they need food, they need that energy in order to be able to get through it. And are there better and worse options? Perhaps. But even that conversation, right? And like you said, these are tricky topics to talk about, it because if we're over moralizing those choices, it only leads down a negative path as well.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that there is a great opportunity for people to just make sure that dancers have the opportunities to actually get the fuel in. Um, and then, parents, again, it's like having all the options available, making sure that your kid's dance bag is full of those, things that are not going to go bad, trail mix, granola,
Right.
whatever, like dry foods that can stay in there so that they always have something with them. Because that's
Yeah.
something that clients will tell me is like, well, I just didn't have anything with me. It's like, you just always have something with you, because then
Yeah.
it's not an issue. And like when it can be fresh and whole, great. But when it has to be those easy to go to things, then it has to be those things.
Yeah.
Um, so beyond adequate fueling, it is encouraging variety and flexibility and,
Mm.
covering nutrient bases. So a lot of times young people, I would say I've only, because my clients tend to be like a bit older. 15 is the youngest I
Hmm.
typically work with. So by that point, most are beyond picky eating stages. But I've had some clients who were like still considered themselves picky eaters. But encouraging variety in a meal plan is only going to help you, like I said, get what you actually need.
Right.
So it's like very basic things like that, but that I think we, again, some parents are overthinking it,
Yeah.
and are, and a lot of parents also bring in their own food challenges and food relationship
Mm,
issues, and the diet mentality that we're all very surrounded by all the time, and so they're not always able to separate themselves and say, well, yeah, but my kid is an athlete with
yeah.
the amount that they're moving their body and using their body. And so like that does require a lot of food to actually.
Right. 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 Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And I think too, it's important, like just understanding to your point of like not overthinking it is like, if your kid is getting very little, then even just baseline increasing that's already better off than they were before. Um, so that totally makes sense. When we talk about like scheduling, because this is something obviously that creates a lot of issues around all of this, right? Why do you think, in your opinion, studios are doing this? Because it's been in. I mean, I've been teaching for around 12 years now. It's
Yeah.
been progressively worse and worse and worse every single time they're teaching. Like they add more classes, they add more this. It's like now we have kids, like I work with kids that are like Monday through Saturday training 4 hours a day. Do you do you think, because sometimes I have a hard time with, I feel like it's pressure from a lot of different sides. Like, because the parents obviously want their kids to do well. So then that puts pressure on the studio. The studio wants to do well to reflect the studio. Do you think there is like, is this like chicken egg situation, or is there sort of something we can point to that's like, this is why this is happening?
I don't know that I can point to like, whether it's parents or studios necessarily perpetuating it. I do think it's like kind of simply the mentality that, oh, like this amount is good, so more must be better.
Okay.
And I do
Yeah.
think there's a lot of missing conversation in the dance world about like the dance medicine and science, we can say like things that they have learned
Yeah.
recently, and in the fact that they say that dancers should be dancing the number of hours of years of years of life. So if you're 15, you should be dancing no more than 15 hours a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and there are dancers who are dancing like 30 hours a week. I'm like, how are
Yeah.
you how does that even work,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
with school also.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think there's also a lot of room for opportunity to, rather than, if the studios want to offer more, rather than having it be hours upon hours of classes, dance classes, like maybe you have a couple hours a week where it's some sort of mentorship
Hmm.
among older students and younger students.
Yeah.
Or it's like, just talking about mindset going into competition and things like that,
Yeah.
because like I said, with the kids who I teach who compete, I teach them ballet on Tuesdays. And like every Tuesday, pretty much since the competition situation has started, they're asking if we can do something else. Like, can we do floor bar? Can we
Hmm.
do like just like some ab work? How about if we just sit down and like talk about, like they ask me these things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's not what I'm paid to do here, unfortunately. But, I think that there's perhaps room for that.
Yeah.
And the kids would actually be better off, and it can still serve the purpose
Right.
of
Right.
them performing better and feeling better and doing their best dancing.
Yeah. 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 That makes sense. One thing I'm curious about as we've progressed through this is, it seems like, specifically with what you do, there's a lot of hard conversations to be had.
Mhm.
So I have two questions. One is, when you do your coachings, do you work with the dancer and the parent? Do you have interaction with the parent? I'm assuming yes.
Hmm.
Okay. So
It's
how
limited.
do
It's
okay, okay.
limited. Yeah.
Okay. So how do those, I mean, do you have those conversations with parents where you're like, this is too much? And, how do you mentally allow yourself to do that? Because I think, including myself, I think a lot of teachers just kind of struggle. They see things and they recognize things and they're like, I don't think this is right. But then I don't know that they really know how to find that voice to say, hey, maybe we should try something else.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So with parents, it really depends on the parent, as I'm sure you can understand, right?
Yeah,
Like there are some parents who are sending me lots of emails to check in on things. There are some parents who want to periodically have conversations about things. And I'm very open to all of it because I think, obviously, especially when a dancer is under 18, their parents' involvement or lack thereof can have a big impact one way or another.
for sure.
Um, and I do try to have the hard conversations, and it's so interesting to me because there's some very toxic training environments, and
Hmm.
I will encounter dancers in those environments, and sometimes I know beforehand, like before I start working with them, like the environment is going to likely be a part of what's hard here for this
Yeah,
person
yeah,
because I know I've just been hearing over and over about what that situation is like. Um, but I will say flat out to parents, like I know it's a big change. I know you've invested this time and money and whatnot into getting your dancer to that space or supporting them within that. But it really might be best to look for alternative options.
hmm,
And, rarely are they willing to overnight change
for
direction.
sure, for
It
sure.
tends to take time and
Yeah,
just like a little bit more eye opening around like what's the impact of the situation that the kid is in. But a lot of times they do come around to, okay, like the environment is a big part of this problem,
yeah,
or
yeah,
um, the situation or the schedule and that kind
yeah.
of
When I've come across two situations where it's an access thing, like they're
right.
in a smaller town somewhere, and the next closest studio is 75 miles away, and it's like, and I'll get those messages, and I'm like, I mean, sometimes I'm just like, I don't know what I mean, short of the entire studio changing, there's really not, so it's kind of a
Right.
bummer sometimes when you run into stuff like
Definitely.
that. Um, You've mentioned a few times, and obviously, I think this is something people are aware of, but I don't think they really think about. And I know that I just recently, crazy enough, started thinking about this concept. But um, a lot of these kids, especially the ones that we're talking about, they're in these positions where they're dancing, 15 hours plus. Um, the amount of time that they're spending at home with their families is very, very, very little. Like, especially when we talk about competition season, we're talking about very much not so at all. Maybe the parent is around, they're driving them from place to place. Um, what is your experience with that sort of dynamic? Do you feel like I feel like this is kind of a silly question, but do you feel like it affects them in certain ways? Do you feel like a lot of things maybe would settle themselves if that wasn't the situation?
Support, is key. And I think that, and I work with a lot of dancers too who have even just moved away from home at 15 for some
Jeez.
pre-professional training,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that can be very isolating. And even just the stress of that
Yeah.
can lead to issues with food or challenges with body image, right? Like
Mm,
even just that stress can,
yeah.
can be sort of the impetus for these other things. Um, and in some cases, like parents can only be so involved. Like we said, with schedules, the kids schedule their own schedules and work schedules, right? Like how much
Yeah.
they're able to actually be in conversation with their children. I would say the one benefit of if they're living at home, but at the dance studio many, many hours, like the parent still is laying eyes on them every
Right.
day and
Right.
able to at least visually see how, like, the picture of well-being and how the kid looks, and if they're looking more tired or run down, or if they're unhealthily losing weight or changing their body, right?
Yeah.
But there certainly is a missing piece of just allowing for the more open conversation. I mean, I'll say too, being someone who works with teens and not really younger,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's part of it too. And the teenager is not as interested in opening up to their parent about what they're going through or the struggles.
Right.
Or a lot of dancers have that feeling like, yeah, my family, none of them are dancers, so they don't actually understand
Right.
what
Right.
it's like. And that is sometimes where I feel like I'm able to fill a bit of a gap, because a lot of dancers are open to confiding in me about what they're going through because they know I've had a similar experience.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you feel like as a dance teacher, and maybe you can kind of speak to this from your perspective and then just as a whole, do you think it's important to be mindful of the fact that these kids are, they're going to school all day and then they're coming to us. So it's not like they're coming to us fresh. They're coming to us after, X amount of hours at school. Do you think that that's something that teachers are not as mindful of as they should be?
What I see even more than that, I think that that's a part of it, but I feel like even more than that, it's a lack of acknowledgement of how different the world is with the media and technology and social media that
Yeah.
we're all dealing with. It's such a different thing to be exposed to Instagram and those things for the first time as an adult,
Mm-hmm.
compared with, like, if you think about what the impact on you might have been if you had been exposed to those things when you were like 13, 14,
Yeah.
15. So I think that there's the exhaustion from just the kids have been at school all day, and
Yeah.
then they're and like minds on for the most part, or they're
Yeah.
expected to have their minds on at school. And then they come to you and you want their mind on and focused on what they're doing there as well. And then also you want as much physical energy as they can muster, which,
Yeah.
like, might not be that much at that point,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But then I think that people don't fully acknowledge the added challenges that social media poses for
Yeah.
young people.
Do you think what is the way around is just not a good word because there is none, but what is the way through that, do you think, for kids? Because I think it's a huge thing. And one thing I feel like I've had all these kind of realizations recently, but the other thing that I was thinking about a lot the past couple of months is, before you would see like the 1% of dancers very occasionally. And it was almost like a treat to see them. You'd go to a convention or you'd go to a show and you'd see them for a flash moment in a group or whatever it was. And it was a moment of like pure inspiration for you as a dancer because you were only getting a little taste of what it was. And then you could go home and kind of chase after that. But what's happening now is these kids are able to see the 1% at their free will 24/7. And I think it really quickly changes from inspiration to just complete demotivation and demoralization. Is there a way through that for dancers? Is it a perspective thing? Is it limiting, the amount of time? What do you feel like is kind of the way through?
I think that limiting and filtering social media is big, like, beyond really tailoring your feed to be things that you find actually inspiring.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, and I even will tell my clients, like, if you have a friend who is, always posting amazing things on social media and like
Yeah.
they're your friends, so you feel
Yeah.
like you have to, like, you can still like mute your friends
I love
and
that.
occasionally just go in and like tap so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they're
yeah.
like, oh, okay, because I know that teenagers will sometimes confront one another and be like, why didn't you like my post?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like, okay, like, we can even moderate that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and then just like overall, what are the limits. And, you know, I think that dancers, well, we all do this. We tend to like be on social media when we're like already exhausted. Like you're like sitting on the couch and you have
Yeah.
your phone and then you're like just looking. This is something I speaking for
Same.
like
Yeah. I'm with you.
just like
I'm there. I'm
scrolling
with you.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
not present. And so I think for young people to question, like, what does that actually do for you when you're
Yeah.
already mentally and physically exhausted? Is it serving you
Yeah.
to lay on the couch and scroll through, like you said, seeing just the most like top of
Yeah.
the dance world
Yeah.
people? Like, is
Yeah.
that actually inspiring, or is it going to make you just feel like, why am I doing this? What is the point
Right.
if I'm not that?
Do you think
So
it's like a sense of escapism in a way when they do it? And do you think that there's room? My follow up question to that is, do you think there's room and the capacity for studios to position themselves as the replacement for that? If they, you know, if a studio were to do some of the things that you were mentioning of like changing up schedules, giving breaks, et cetera, do you think that over time that would maybe take the place for some of these kids?
yeah, I think it certainly could. Yeah, because it allows for community building and connection
Yeah.
without seeking in
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
you know.
So here's something. I'm having this thought as we're having this conversation. I'm curious what your take is, especially because you were a professional dancer at one time. You know, in the, let's say, the olden days. You're not that old, but just in terms of dance.
Yeah.
Um, and I think at that point, the way that studios were teaching and the way that schedules were built, et cetera, there was kind of this natural filtration of what's the nicest way to put this? I don't know that there is. Just dancers that weren't naturally, they weren't going to get there, right? I think, you know, before we would see a lot of these kids falling off sooner than we do now. And
Hmm.
I think that somewhere along the line, maybe inadvertently, we realized that if we push the kids really, really hard, we can squeeze through some of those kids that maybe wouldn't have, you know, for lack of better words, made the cut before. I'm just curious. This is very spur of the moment. I'm curious what your thought is on that, because as we're having this conversation, I'm like, maybe there's something to that. That maybe that's why some of this overwork has been implemented, is because it's like, oh, we can actually get some of these kids who, you know, maybe aren't naturally talented. We can get them close enough to the kids that are, that it works.
Yeah, I think that it could certainly be part of it.
Yeah. Because
Um,
it's just strange to me that we and there's so many byproducts that I feel like are being overlooked, that is also odd to me. Like, we're seeing kids have these injuries that used to only happen to, you know, professional working adults that were being overworked in those situations. We're seeing these happen, like, I mean, here in Utah, it's very, very common for you know, 13, 14, 15 year olds to be having hip surgery. And it's like, to me, that would be a very significant red flag of like, this is not, you know, and sometimes, like, benefit of the doubt, there are kids that just are prone to, you know, it's probably going to happen at some point. But at 13, 14, 15, it
yeah,
feels like that would be a kind of an indicator of like, maybe something's off here.
absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
think it's same thing with like burnout. You're seeing kids burn out way sooner than before. And it just seems like a lot of these things are being either overlooked or they're just being overshadowed
Mhm.
by the Goliath that is competitive dance.
Yeah. I mean, you can't ignore like the business aspect
Yeah.
of like dance schools, and
Yeah.
obviously studio owners are intending to turn a profit,
Right.
and more classes should yield more profit.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing, just I think about our world and intentions as a whole. It's
Mm.
like is that what's motivating these many, many hours of classes, or even just part of it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
people honest with themselves about that? Are they honest, in the way that they're conveying these options? Like,
Yeah.
or is it what they truly believe is best?
Right. 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 Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's very, I think it's, again, it's kind of like back to the idea of like, is it parents or studios? There's so many factors that it's like, it's really, really hard to figure out what's what.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to get a few things from you in terms of, let's start with studios. So, if a studio is listening and they're like, yes, 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 okay, I love it. What are like, there's a difference between feeling passionate, like feeling like you like something and then taking action. What are some things, base level, not a lot of commitment that studios can start implementing, next week, that you feel like or you have seen would make a difference in some of these kids?
Yeah. Um, I, when I teach, one of the nights that I teach, it's like 3 hours and 15 minutes. People who teach a lot are probably like, oh, wow, Jess, impressive. Like that many hours. But like 3 hours and 15 minutes, and like the timing of it is kind of like through when I would normally eat dinner time.
Mm-hmm.
And so very often between the two classes that I'm teaching, which don't have any space between them, they start one after the other.
Yeah.
I will eat a snack.
Yeah.
And one of the weeks, the kids in my second class said to me after bar, actually, do you think that we could get like a quick snack from our bags? And I was like, yes, please, like go eat a snack. Like
Yeah.
I think that there should, I mean, obviously, if you can set it up so that it is not in the middle of a class, that's
Right.
perhaps better. But I think that allowing for flexibility with that and not being like, no, what are you talking about? That's
Yeah.
a wild idea.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have asked if they weren't actually hungry or feeling
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
needed
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that even just like an openness to checking in with students about how they're feeling, and
Mm.
then like being a bit more easygoing
Yeah.
in reasonable ways. I mean, and even obviously they had a snack. It took 5 minutes. It was
Yeah.
not some huge time wasting monumental interruption
Yeah.
if we were
Well,
trying
and
to go.
if you think from the perspective too, like, we can assume that the snack did multitude of things for that dancer. I mean, it would be not an over exaggeration to say that like you probably would have wasted that 5 minutes trying to get them to do something that they weren't mentally there to do because they were hungry. So I think it's realizing that as well.
Mm-hmm. What's the benefit?
Yeah. Do you think, this is a sidebar, but do you think that it's like, because the other thing it's hard. I constantly have this battle is like, studios want to do so much, right? They want to do all of the stuff. Like they want the kids to do everything. And I think it's good, but it also just inherently leaves room for nothing else. So do you think that there's also balance in that? And do you think that there's like a world where we try to at least cater dance training a little bit more to what the dancers actually want to do? Because maybe people will think that this is too bold of a statement to say, but like, I don't know that every single dancer needs to take ballroom, or every single dancer needs to take tap, or even maybe even some of the bigger ones. Like if you have a dancer that has no interest at all in doing musical theater, then maybe they don't need to take musical theater. I don't know. I just think sometimes studios, in an effort to give so much, are taking away a lot of opportunity for other things.
Yeah, 100%. I think that there's, you know, for me, I do think about whether some of it is, again, business and profit driven, right? Like the more classes, the
Right.
more required classes,
Right.
and perhaps you would retain more dancers for longer if there was a bit more flexibility in
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
things.
Well, I think there's ways to position it, even just
Mhm.
like let's take this example that we're kind of talking about, like if you had a set dinner break, charge the parents a couple extra dollars a month on their tuition, and maybe the studio provides that meal and you upcharge the meal a little bit. And now
Yeah.
you're not taking up time in the studio to lose money, if that's
Right.
the way that the studio is viewing it, but you're also providing something of value. So I think it's also just studios being a little more creative about
Definitely.
their offerings. Sidebar, I apologize.
Yeah. No, I love
But that's great. Yeah, I think that that's easily something that studios could start at least thinking about, right? Is like,
it. Mhm.
is there flexibility that we have? On the flip side, parents, what are some things, same situation of parents listening to this and they're like, okay, yes, I want my dancer to be successful. What are some things that they can start doing immediately that would be, a big change in just the environment that dancer's in?
Yeah. I think, it gets to a point where it's all happening very automatically as far as
Mm,
taking the next, like going into the next year of dancing and committing to the same things and
yeah.
day to day and week to week. And I don't think there's enough consistent check in with young dancers as far as how they're feeling about what they're doing and if they're enjoying it and what they're getting out of it.
Yeah.
And again, like sometimes when it's a competition driven studio, even the parents have a mentality around like the worth of winning and that how we're quantifying that and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it all can really take away from staying connected to your dancer and their joy or passion and love for what they're doing.
Right.
um, and like dance is one of those things that I think sometimes we, like I said, dancers start doing it and it takes up so much time and space in their lives that they are not given any opportunity to reassess. And then like I even have had clients who are starting out in those professional years who are kind of like very unclear as to why they're doing what they're doing. And then they'll say
Mm,
things to me like, well, I've been doing this since I was 8,
yeah.
seriously, and my parents have put so much into it. And I'm like, okay, your parents have put so much into it. That's not a good reason to keep doing it. So I think
Oh,
like, and parents too sometimes get very attached to their kid's identity as a
for
dancer
sure.
as well.
For
So like
sure.
even for them to be like, am I telling them they need to keep doing this because they've been doing it for so long? Or am
Yeah.
I giving them the space to maybe choose a different direction?
Yeah. I'm curious as we kind of head into the tail end of this, just kind of listening to this process that you have and just kind of your perspective and the fact that you do work with predominantly 15 and above. What are your thoughts on college for dancers?
Hmm.
Is it something that actively promote to dancers? Is it something that you encourage? Is it something because I've had more and more of these conversations recently, not just with parents, but with other like industry professionals. So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious what your take is.
Yeah. Well, I did go to college for dance.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, whenever I talk about my path, I definitely don't think I was ready to go straight into a company
Yeah.
at 18. Um, so, for me, it was definitely a beneficial pit stop, perhaps.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's that way. It's something to consider in that way as well. Like some dancers, uh, I did think it's fewer dancers who are actually ready to go straight into professional because
Yeah.
it's so much like it's like very stressful. I mean,
Yeah.
and to be 18 and like yes, dancers in general are younger, but like then to have coworkers who are 29
Yeah.
and and in very different stages of life,
Yep.
I think that can be very tricky to navigate. So I think there's a lot of benefit to college for dancers, especially now as it's more accepted in companies. Like there was
Yeah.
when I went to college for dance, it was like looked upon as not an option really if you wanted to actually be a professional. Like
Yeah.
a lot of companies would not even consider you if you took that path. And that has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, and the college dance scene has changed to the degree where many more programs are allowing students to double major
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like actually get a, an educationally focused degree at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value to it, and like I said, I think it just depends on the person. It's an
Yeah.
option I think
Yeah.
to keep open.
For sure. And I think that's what my perspective was for a long time, is like I was looking at it more so just the value of the degree itself. And I didn't really see the one to one there. But
Mm,
I think once I kind of was opened up to this idea that like it's not necessarily the value of the degree per se, but just the whole process, I think it made a lot more sense to me. Because yeah, it's true. Like the interpersonal of the dance industry is what will push you exceedingly far away from it, way more than anything else. Like the
mhm.
everything else is like, there's environments where if you're probably doing too much work wise, but a lot of times like the work isn't that crazy. It's dealing with people you don't like, or it's like, it's those types of things that if you don't, yeah, as a kid, if you've never had to really deal with that on an environment where you don't have somebody else overseeing it, it can be really stressful.
Yeah.
Um, so I always like to kind of finish off with I keep saying that I need a better term, and I need to stop saying that because I'm never going to change it. But it's just like this golden nugget idea. So if there was anybody listening, if there's one thing that you would like them to take away, that you're kind of like at this moment really focused on in terms of helping, changing, what would that be?
Work to build self-awareness,
Mm,
because that's part of what we lose in the busyness of it all.
yeah.
Like so many dancers just don't even give themselves any time or space to be aware of what's going on in their own heads, and to, like I said, like to be connected to why they're still dancing and why they love it, or like what's going well about it or what's not going well about it, so like give yourself the time to actually step back and be aware of what's going on
Mm,
for you.
I love that. I love that. Jess, thank you so much. This has been a great episode. I think something that is, again, really needed and a necessity. And I think that that's why I was drawn to your page. I feel like I initially saw your stuff through Shane with Athletistry.
Mhm.
But I also feel like I've just seen like there's like a handful of us that are kind of all like at the same audience size and the same kind of like place, and I feel like I see just dancers sharing your stuff. So I was really, really drawn immediately because I think it's so, so important. And I think as I've matured and gotten older and realized the importance of like not just focusing on the dance, I think your content really, really resonated. So I appreciate what you do.
Yeah,
Where can people find you? Where can people, if someone's interested in coaching, how can they go about that? Give us the rundown.
sure. So on Instagram, it's at the whole dancer. And then my website is thewholedancer.com. And on there, they can find a bit more as far as, what we would cover in coaching. And then they can set up an initial consultation to kind of get a better feel for it and idea of whether it's a fit for what they need.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much again. The links for Jess's stuff will be in the description for this. So be sure to check her out and get a consultation,
Yeah.
get the work in. All right, Jess, thank you so much.
Thank you.